verse you wrote had Angela Lansbury in it, someone's going to die. If Paul was traveling with you or being in your city, there was going to be a problem. And so in chapter 27, starting with verse 19, they're in the middle of this shipwreck, this storm. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. After the men had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete." Now, don't you know they wanted to hear, and I told you so at that point? They're in a storm, they're hungry, and he said, "I should have told you, shouldn't have. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all those who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as God told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some islands.'" Okay, now, you're not one of Paul's followers. You're not a Christian. And he got on your boat because he's been taken to Rome to be held for trial. And he says this to you. What would you think?
Not good.
I hope he knows what he's talking about. I hope he's got that direct line. So verse 27, on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. About midnight, the sailors, since they were approaching land, they took some soundings and found the water was 120 feet deep. Yeah, let's jump in there. A short time later, they took soundings again, and it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the storm against the rocks and into the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape the ship, the sailors let the lifeboats down to the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. And Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it fall away. Paul said, "Look, God made this promise that all of us are going to get there alive. And if they sneak off, we're not going to make it." Look at who listened to him. Who listened to him and cut those ropes? The centurion and the Roman soldiers. Now, my guess is, and I've often been taught this, if these guards stayed around Paul very long, he preached and preached and preached, so they probably got saved to make him be quiet and nothing else. Just before dawn, Paul urged all of them to eat. For the last 14 days, you've been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God. Oh, that sounds familiar. In front of them, then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged to make some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. Another case again of why has that number survived all these years? 276. When I think about this, I think of a small little dinghy type boat. This was a larger boat that had almost 300 folks on it. When daylight came and they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they let them into the sea and at the same time untied the ropes that held the runners. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship had struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken into pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to swim overboard first and to get to land. The rest were to get on planks or on pieces of ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. This is probably the first surfing in the Bible. Okay. Again, the centurion didn't want Paul to be killed. Now, it sounds like he was just trying to save Paul's life. You know another reason he may not have wanted Paul to be killed?
He might have killed.
If he didn't show up in Rome with Paul, he could have been killed himself. So they were going to hang on to that scrawny little man no matter what happened. They were going to make sure he got there. Again, what Paul had told them came true. Nobody was lost. Everybody made it to sea, to land, to the sea. This is one of those that I used to, like I said, I had a comic book of the New Testament. This was the coolest pictures with the people hanging onto the pieces of the boat trying to get to the shore. And of course, the story's not over yet. Once safely on shore, we found that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us because it was raining and cold. You want to talk about this fire and oh my gosh, guess what happens? As he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his head. Okay, this may be the initial snake handling also, but nobody's called it that per se. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake, and it fell off into the fire, and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall over dead. But after waiting for a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen, they changed their minds. Now they say he's a god. Fickle people. He went from being a murderer. Oh my gosh, he's still living. He must be a god. They go on to talk about where he was taken care of on that island. Go over to verse 11. After 3 months, they stayed on Malta for 3 months. We put out to sea in a ship that had wintered in the island. It was an Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods, Castor and Pollux. We put in at Syracuse and stayed there 3 days. From there we set sail. The next the south wind came up, and on the following day we reached this other town, where we found some brothers who invited us to spend a week with them. And so we came to Rome. The word is spreading before he even gets there. Think of the story that people who didn't know anything much about Jesus or the Bible, all they knew, this Paul guy that was preaching Jesus, had been bitten by a viper, a poisonous snake, and lived to tell it. And who knows what he had told them all about in those 3 months while he was there. My brothers, although I have done nothing against, he said to them, "My brothers, although I have done nothing against the people or against the custom of our ancestors, I was arrested in Jerusalem and handed over to the Romans. They examined me and wanted to release me because I was not guilty, but when the Jews objected, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar. Now that I have had any charge to bring against my own people, for this reason, I've asked to see you and to talk to you. It's because of the hope of Israel I'm bound with this chain." No matter what happens to Paul, he keeps preaching. Don't you think every once in a while you want to say, "This is too hard"? I was trying to reset the password on something, I don't know what it is now. And finally, for my password, I used, "This is too hard." But Paul just kept finding another way to witness, another way to testify. Let's skip over to the very end of this book, because there's something very important in the final words. He preaches again and meets with a bunch of people. Verse 28. Therefore, I want you to know that God's salvation has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will listen. Still trying to convince the Jews, but the Gentiles get on us too. For 2 whole years, Paul stayed in his own rented house and welcomed all who came to see him. Boldly and without hindrance, he preached the kingdom of God and taught them the Lord Jesus. So what did Paul do with that last 2 years he had sitting in his rented house under guard? He did 3 things. He welcomed everyone. He welcomed. You know, by now his word, his reputation is spread. I bet people came by to look at him almost like in a zoo. They wanted to see this Paul guy. He welcomed them, and then he preached to them, and then he taught them. I think that's a real important threesome there. He welcomed them, he preached to them, and then he taught them. What's the difference between teaching and preaching to the new people?
Teaching, you're kind of explaining it in a way that people understand. Preaching, you're just putting it out there.
Right. And I was reading the Message Bible, little notes that go along with that. And the author said, Any church that breaks up this pattern will not survive. You first have to welcome people. You have to tell them about Jesus. And then when they accept that and begin to walk with you, you have to teach them. You have to help them grow up in the Lord. And that pattern is just so natural there with Paul. Paul wasn't there much longer after this end of the book of Acts. We don't know exactly how long. There's some real question about how long he lived and what happened to him for sure. But the last thing that his last message to people was welcome everyone, preach the gospel to them, and then help them grow up. We've been through a lot of people and a lot of stories here in the book of Acts. I'll give you a sheet of paper. You have to write down everybody you remember. Jean said, "Where's the Lord?" No, that's no excuse. Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
I mean, it's in the car, it's not easy to put it on a computer.
Would you like one, Trips?
Okay, I'll let you skip.
Very first person we find out in the book of Acts here about is Jesus. What happens to Jesus in the very beginning of the book of Acts? If you want a cheap look, you can. If you remember, you can tell me.
Now, what was the question? Sorry.
Pardon me?
What was the question?
Jesus shows up in the book of Acts. What happens to Jesus in the first chapter of the book of Acts?
Ascension.
Ascension. He's been with the folks. Now it's time to go back to God in heaven. And the funniest part about that story, I think, is they're all standing there looking up, and the two men again say, "What are you looking at? What are you looking at? He told you this was going to happen." Then the next person we hear about for a good bit of the first parts of the book of Acts is Peter. Tell me something about Peter.
Peter was preaching in this one.
He was the first preacher in the new church. He was good at speaking up at all times and all places. But he was the first one, especially around Pentecost. When everybody's attention was gathered, he was the one that preached that first sermon there. Somebody look up chapter 4, verse 2. See what this sharing is about. Everyone read 4:2?
Yeah, let me jump a little behind it. As they were speaking to the people, the priests and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection from the dead.
Acts 4.
Did I get that wrong? Am I in the wrong chapter?
4:2. No, you're not wrong. I know. It was actually supposed to be, how embarrassing. Oh, it's supposed to be chapter 2, verse 42.
You're right. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers.
And they shared all things together. Remember that? How the early church came together and shared everything. The old joke in one accord because they liked condoms or something. But you remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira? What happened to them? It has to do with your offering on Sundays. They sold ground and said they were going to give the whole thing to the early church. And when asked about it, they said, yeah, it's all, but they had kept some. When the husband came in, Peter called him on it, poof, he died. The wife comes in a little while later. She agrees, they gave it all. Poof, she died too. It's an interesting story and one that kind of hard to keep up with and figure out. I don't know that I've ever figured out exactly why that really happened. And I've often wondered if it was just a matter of being so embarrassed that they lied and got caught at it. If they had this like a heart attack or a stroke or something. But whatever, the story said they died. 7 chosen. I thought there were 12. Now where did we get the 7? Remember that one?
He was the 7 that was supposed to distribute food to the widows.
They needed some organization, they needed a board of directors, they needed a deacon group. And so the disciples didn't pick those 7, if you read the story later. The disciples said to the people, you pick out 7 people you trust, and they will help with the distribution of the food and other things that are needed. There's some real patterns in here. And then there was Stephen. Anybody remember what happened to Stephen? He got stoned to death. He was preaching, and they took him and they grabbed him and started stoning him. And who held the coats of the guys throwing the rocks? Paul before he became Paul. And he also heard the sermon that Stephen preached. A lot of people think that was the seeds planted in his mind that led to his salvation. What about Philip?
Baptized the eunuch.
He started preaching to the eunuch. And what was unusual? No, what was unusual. The eunuch was from where? Ethiopia. But he had been to the temple because he was one of the Jews that had become converted, and he kept all the things. We know he was really rich because he had a chariot. He had a car. He had transportation. He wasn't walking, and he wasn't riding his stinking donkey. He had a chariot. And he's reading from the book of Isaiah, and Philip goes up and walks along beside him. You ever notice people that walk by your car when you're waiting on somebody? We were buying gas in Richmond. I don't know how we got to Richmond, but we were buying gas in Richmond. And this guy pulled in right beside us at another pump. And I have to tell you, I was kind of like worried a little bit. I'm checking out, where's he going? What side of the car is he on? So here's the Ethiopian eunuch, and this guy suddenly appears walking along beside him. But he was there for a purpose, and the man was open and ready. Some of us have sat through some really great studies and sermons and went right over our heads, right in one ear and out the other, because we weren't ready to hear that yet. And then after he teaches him about Jesus and how Isaiah was talking about Jesus, what did Philip do then? The Ethiopian asked him to baptize him. And they stopped at some water on the side of the road. We don't know how deep it was. We don't know how clean it was. And Philip rode on with him to the next 3 towns, right? It's another fun part of the story. Philip disappeared. Ended up in a town 30, 40 miles away. After that, we run into Saul. Why were people so surprised that Saul eventually hooked up with the Christians?
He was hunting them down.
He was what?
Hunting them down.
He had been hunting them down and killing them. And he was on his way to the city where he was headed to kill them. When suddenly he saw a bright light. And the voice spoke to him. And he then could not see. And the fun part of that story is Cornelius. God spoke to Cornelius and said, you know that Saul guy's been killing everybody? Well, you have to go get him. You have to send somebody to your house. Because you have to talk to him about Jesus. Think about the worst murderer you've ever thought about. And if Jesus asked you to go talk to them, telling you they've been converted, you just have to go talk to them. You see what a leap of faith that took for Cornelius? The LA church had a prison inside the walls of the California Institute for Women. And I went a couple of times with them. And they would go there and have church every Sunday. And they always had to get permission. It was a big hoopla just to get in. But one of the people that attended that service regularly was one of the Charles Manson women. Yeah. And Nancy said she served her communion many, many times. She said, I wasn't thinking she was one of the ones that killed people with Charles Manson. I was thinking she's a woman believing in Jesus now, coming to communion. But yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Just gotta make you think. Going to jails never bothered me with who's in there. I'm worried about the guards, because they have guns, and that just petrifies me. Used to go over in Dublin, there was a prison over there, I remember what it was, on Route 100. When I was in college, we'd go over and do Sunday school for the guys. And I was fine with them, but those guards up in the towers. Okay, so then the next one is where Peter gets his eyes open. Do you remember that story? Peter's sleeping, he's had bad pizza or something for dinner, and what happens? He has that dream, remember? With all these things he's never been allowed to eat before. And God says something totally, totally crazy. He says, eat. Eat of all of it. Eat of any of it. And I love how God handled Peter saying, oh no, you must be wrong. I can't eat that. It always humors think we try to tell God God is wrong. Or God doesn't know. And God convinced him and he understood and he got it from the dream. And at the same time he was having that dream, God spoke to Cornelius and said, go find Peter and help him understand that Gentiles can be Christians. That's synchronicity, how things work together. And then Barnabas, what did Barnabas do? He didn't get a whole lot of publicity. He traveled with Paul and preached. He traveled with Paul and preached for these things. And Timothy, what about Timothy? What was unusual about Timothy?
He wasn't called to come go with him.
Paul wanted Timothy to go with him, but he was young. But he had a problem. Paul was going to be teaching and preaching to Gentiles. Timothy had to endure something before he could go preach to the Gentiles. He had to be circumcised. Right after Paul preaches this whole big lesson on how circumcision is necessary. Sometimes you just want to go, what? Do what? But again, it was understanding what would speak to people. I'll give you an example of that, non-circumcision. But many years ago, the Pope, one of the Johns, I think, was going to be in LA. And Troy and Nancy somehow got passes to go sit with the other clergy in that. And Troy went to Nancy and he said, now Nancy, this is a real dress-up thing. And she said, okay, Troy. He says, no, I mean really dress up. She said, and so I made sure I had a suit and a skirt and hose and heels. Now, could she go any old way? Yes, but Troy wanted to make sure that she fit in with everybody else. I only saw her do that one other time. That was when we were at the Crystal Cathedral for our leadership conference. And they invited some of us to serve communion. And somewhere or another, she pulled out the skirt again and had that on. Sometimes you have to adjust your language or your terminology so people will hear you. Lydia is one of my favorite characters. Remember anything about Lydia? I'll go down to the river. She had a prayer meeting down by the river. And we know that she was a person of money. It said she was a seller of purple. And what kind of people used purple? Rich people. Rich people. And not only did she have a prayer meeting, they already had heard some things about Jesus evidently. And when Paul talked to her and preached to her, she not only listened and absorbed the message, but then they were baptized and she invited them home, which was very unusual for a single woman, no matter how much money she had, to invite a bunch of men home to stay in her house. Where did Paul preach the words to an unknown God? He was in Athens and he saw all these statues and he couldn't believe how many gods they had. And finally he said, he saw one that said to an unknown God, and that gave him the opening. So he wasn't preaching against this God or against that God. He could say, you know the guy you don't know who he is? I do. And slipped right in there. Priscilla and Aquila, I don't think we talked about it, but they were tent makers. And they worked with Paul in making tents. But they were a preaching team. What's unusual about the fact that it was Priscilla and Aquila preaching? Husband and wife, a man and a woman. So for all the people that say women can't preach, they kind of skip that 18th chapter. And one of the ones we talked about last week, Eutychus. What happened to him? Don't snore.
Oh, I fell out of it.
He's the one that fell asleep and fell out of the window, and Paul had to rush down and bring him back to life. And then the last two are the different kings that rulers that Paul was taken before he went to Rome. Felix was the one that his story always breaks my heart, because he listened to Paul many, many times. And finally he said in Old King James, Paul, almost thou persuadest me. Come back at a more convenient time. Almost. We don't know if he ever was convenient for him or not. And then Agrippa was the one that finally finished up in Rome talking to Paul. So there's the book of Acts in 15 easy steps. And the last thing is, what challenges did we see to the church, the new church in the book of Acts? What challenges did they go through that churches today still go through? Well, we know one of them was not circumcision, thank you, Jesus.
Arguments and disagreements.
Arguments and disagreements. A lot of the letters that Paul wrote to churches, especially the Corinthians church, was trying to settle arguments, but they had those. And it wasn't just the rebel crowd, sometimes it was the leaders, because remember Peter and Paul got into quite an argument at one point. What else besides arguments? Taking care of one another. Taking care of the widows especially, who joined up with them. Did Paul ever get any bad publicity? Remember that story? The woman that had demons kept going around telling everybody how great Paul was. And it kind of made people go, okay. And he cast the demons out of them. Bad publicity, good publicity. They had some challenges with leadership. Peter was the leader in the first several books, and then Paul takes over. And Peter and Paul have a fight. We don't hear much out of Peter anymore. The very first people who had almost walked, or Peter had walked with Jesus, they still fought over petty little things. Peter believed the gospel was really, mostly, for the Jewish people. Paul felt his calling was mostly to the Gentile people. Now, there should have been a way to make that work. And it did, because they went to different places. Sometimes you can't stay in the same place when your understanding and your ministry takes you a different place. I'll give you one modern day example of that, and then we're going to get out of here because we're all melting. Many of you know Mel White. Mel White had the group called something. You don't know, but they would go to different colleges and universities and churches, and Mel would try to convince them to stop the hate speech. And he'd have big protests. I told you about the Roanoke church when we went to Thomas Road. Well, after I went to that one with him, I thought, this is not my calling to go and get in Southern Baptist or other people's faces and tell them to shut up, change their talk. And I pondered on that because at that time Mel was one of the stars in MCC. And I finally realized that my calling is to prepare us to be able to handle it when people spout the hate speech. Teach people to bathe in that Teflon I talk about. To be so sure who we are in Christ that whatever somebody else says about us doesn't affect us. And I had a talk with Mel about that at one point, and he just didn't understand. He thought you always had to be in their face.
Didn't he, I don't know what you call it, though. He wrote a book with Paul.
Yes, he was a ghostwriter. Yeah, before he came out, he was a ghostwriter with Jerry Falwell. And he wrote another good book called Stranger at the Gate, which is about, coming out and being gay and lesbian. But he still thought it had to be to stop the hate talk. And I believe for me, it's more important to make you know it's not true than to get in somebody's face and they're going to stop. Because you know what? They're never going to stop. They're never going to stop. There's always going to be somebody who thinks they have the one true word of God. And like Harry told us on Saturday, what true word of God? There's 120 English Bibles in the Library of Congress. Which one? Any last minute thoughts?
That was an eye-opener to think about how many times about the translations and the different Bibles. And
I mean, I consider myself a biblicist. I believe in teaching and preaching from the Bible. But I've also had to learn over the years that what's written on any translation may not be exactly what it was, because there are no original pieces of parchment with any biblical writings. Yes?
Well, I was about to say that one thing in Acts is that there's a lot of doctrine disputes, or not disputes, or past things that were accepted and not accepted then.
Yeah.
There's quite a few in
All about that, all about that. So, I've gotten to the place where I have to trust that God's going to give me discernment when I'm reading Scripture. And God's going to help me do the studying to understand it. And that what has survived in whatever translation has truth that God can be taught. Anything else? Any last minute prayer requests or praises you didn't think of? All right, then let's pray and get to our cars and have air conditioning. Loving God, we thank you for your word that continues to show us that there's not really anything new under the sun, like it says in Ecclesiastes. That some of the same problems that popped up in the first century church still show up. But that you, God, are the same one that can calm those waters, that can give discernment, and can lead us in the way we should. May this church always follow Paul's example and be welcoming, preaching the truth, and teaching growth. In your name we pray. Amen.